My fiancée said she wanted to pause the wedding to reevaluate our long-term compatibility. I respected her decision, sold the shared property, strengthened my asset protection strategy, and finalized a new equity agreement. She reached out later when reevaluation left her without stability or ownership. I don't think I'm ready to walk down that aisle just yet. She said it so calmly, like she was telling me she wasn't ready for dinner. Like 4 years, 2 shared bank accounts, 1 property deed, and a $14,000 engagement ring meant roughly the same thing as a cold plate of food. I didn't say anything. I just sat there with my wine glass halfway to my mouth, frozen in that specific kind of silence that happens when your brain refuses to catch up with your ears. The restaurant was nice. We'd picked it because it was our anniversary dinner. 3 years since the proposal, 1 year into active wedding planning. The centerpieces had been chosen. The venue deposit had been paid. Her dress had been altered twice already. And now she was telling me she needed to pause. Pause, I repeated. Not a question, not an argument. Just the word, sitting there between us like a stone dropped into still water. I just think, she started slowly, that we've been so focused on the wedding that we haven't stopped to really think about whether we're long-term compatible. I looked at her, really looked, and I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't trembling or tearing up. She had rehearsed this. This was a performance. She'd practiced the line, chosen the location, probably even chosen the dress she was wearing because it made her look thoughtful and mature. And I was just the audience. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Let me back up a little. I'm 34. At the time this happened, I was 33. I work in commercial real estate. Not the glamorous kind you see on television where you flip mansions and drive Ferraris. The kind where you spend 14-hour days analyzing zoning documents, negotiating lease terms, and trying to figure out if a strip mall in a mid-sized city is worth refinancing. Vivian was 31. She worked in marketing, specifically brand consulting for mid-level companies trying to rebrand themselves after some kind of public stumble. We met at a networking event. She walked up to me, shook my hand firmly, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "You look like someone who actually knows what he wants." I thought it was bold. Later, I'd realized she had a talent for saying exactly what people needed to hear in exactly the moment they needed to hear it. It was her professional superpower. And I was, for a very long time, her most successful client. Back to the restaurant. After she dropped the pause bomb, I put my glass down. I straightened my jacket. And I said, "Okay." She blinked. She had clearly expected something else. Probably tears. Probably negotiation. Probably me leaning across the table and asking her what I could do, what I could change, how I could be better. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I confirmed. "That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say, Vivian?" She shifted in her seat. "I don't know. I expected you to at least ask why. You said you needed to reevaluate long-term compatibility." I said, "That's your reason. Don't you want to understand it?" I looked at her for a long moment. "I think I understand it just fine." She didn't know what to do with that. Neither did I, honestly. But something had shifted in me in those 30 seconds. Something had clicked off, very quietly, like a light in an empty room. And once that light goes off, I've learned, it doesn't just come back on because someone apologizes or explains or cries. It just stays off. We drove home separately that night. She had taken her own car because she'd had a hair appointment earlier and it was easier than coordinating. I used to find those little logistical separations charming. Signs that we were two independent adults who could coexist without being glued together. That night, driving home alone on the freeway with the city lights blurring past me, I thought about what the word pause actually meant. A pause isn't a stop. A pause implies you're coming back. But a pause also isn't a continuation. It's a suspension, a waiting room. And I had spent my entire adult life building things specifically so I would never have to sit in a waiting room again. My father had taught me that. Not explicitly. Not in some dramatic speech, but through watching him wait. Wait for a promotion that went to someone else. Wait for my mother to decide if she was happy. Wait for circumstances to improve on their own, as if the universe had some obligation to reward patience. He waited, and while he was waiting, everything moved without him. I decided very early that I would not be a man who waited. When I got home, I didn't call her. I didn't text. I made myself a drink, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Not to work, not to distract myself, but to look at numbers. Specifically our numbers. The condo we co-owned was in both our names. It had appreciated significantly since we'd bought it 3 years ago. We were in a market that had gone slightly insane over the past few years, and the unit we'd picked in a transitional neighborhood had gone from a slightly risky investment to what my colleagues would call a very clean asset. There was also the joint savings account. We'd been contributing equally to it for 2 years, earmarking it for the wedding and eventually a down payment on a larger home. There was the shared credit line we'd opened together, which had been used almost exclusively for wedding expenses. And there was the engagement ring, which was legally considered a conditional gift in most jurisdictions, but which in practice tends to become a complicated conversation. I sat there and looked at all of it, not with anger, with the same cold clarity I bring to every deal I have ever analyzed. And I thought, if this pause becomes permanent, and if she uses the word reevaluation as cover for a clean exit, I am sitting in a structurally vulnerable position. Not catastrophically, but vulnerably enough to matter. The next morning, she called. "I think we should talk," she said. "Sure. I just want you to know this isn't about us not loving each other." I let that land for a second. "Vivian, what is it about exactly?" Long pause. "I've just been feeling like I don't fully know who I am outside of this relationship." "You've been in this relationship for 4 years." "I know. We've had this conversation before, actually." "We have. About 18 months ago," I said. "You told me you were worried that your identity had merged too much with mine. I suggested couples therapy. You said you didn't need it, that you just needed more time with your friends. I supported that. You joined 2 different social circles. You started taking solo trips. I never once questioned any of it." Silence. "That's true," she said quietly. "So when you say you need to reevaluate long-term compatibility, I'm wondering what specifically changed between 18 months ago and last night." More silence. I need space to think." "Okay," I said. "That's it again? Okay. What do you want from me?" "I want you to fight for this," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. And there it was. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to panic. She wanted me to beg, to reassure, to make her feel so irresistibly needed that she could walk back from the edge feeling like she had power over something. "Vivian," I said, "I've been fighting for this for 4 years. I've compromised on timing, on finances, on where we live, on how we plan our future. I've been patient, and I've been consistent, and I've shown up every single day. If that's not enough to make you certain, then I don't think me fighting right now is going to change that." She didn't say anything. "Take the time you need," I said. "I'll be here." And I meant it. I just wasn't going to be passive while she figured herself out. I called my attorney that same week. Not to do anything aggressive, just to understand my position. He was a guy I'd worked with for years on commercial deals, a sharp, low-drama man named Clifton who had seen every variation of human stupidity the real estate market could produce. I told him the situation. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "So you're not broken up?" "Not formally, but she's asked for a pause on the engagement." "Correct. And you co-own property?" "Correct." He was quiet for a moment. "You want to know where you stand, or you want to know what your options are?" "Both." He walked me through it. The condo, purchased jointly, would require both parties to agree to a sale or require a legal partition action if one party wanted to force the issue. The joint savings account was split 50-50 in both names, meaning either party could technically withdraw funds unilaterally, which was a risk I hadn't fully considered. The shared credit line was joint liability, meaning if she spent on it, I owed half. The ring was in a gray zone, as I suspected. "What I'd recommend," Clifton said, "is not doing anything dramatic. But I would strongly suggest tightening up anything that could become a liability exposure while your status is undefined." "Undefined," I repeated. "That's the problem with a pause," he said simply. "It's not a breakup. It's not an engagement. It's a legal and emotional no man's land. So what do you suggest?" He thought for a moment. "Start by having a very direct conversation with her about the joint account. Establish that neither of you will make significant withdrawals without mutual agreement. Get it in writing if you can, even just an email chain that establishes intent. And the property? That depends on how long you're willing to hold the pause." I sat with that. What if I'm not willing to hold it indefinitely? Clifton leaned back in his chair. "Then you have a decision to make," he said. "And you should make it clearly, not reactively." I spent 2 weeks doing what I always do when I'm processing something difficult. I worked. I threw myself into a commercial acquisition I'd been slow-walking for months, a mid-size office complex in a city 3 hours away that had significant value upside if the tenant mix was restructured correctly. I ran numbers. I negotiated. I flew out twice. I made an offer. During those 2 weeks, Vivian and I texted occasionally. Nothing heavy. She sent me a photo of her dog doing something ridiculous. I responded with a laughing emoji. She told me she was going to visit her college friend, a woman named Brooke who lived on the coast and who Vivian had always described as a grounding presence. I said that sounded good. I didn't ask when she was coming back. She didn't volunteer it. I noticed she was posting more on social media. Not anything dramatic. Just more of her. Solo trips to cafes. Sunrises she'd gotten up early to see. A photo of her shoes at the edge of the ocean. The kind of content that says, I am discovering myself. The kind of content that also says, to anyone paying close attention, I am performing discovery for an audience. I didn't comment on any of it. I just watched. 3 weeks in, she called me on a Sunday evening. How are you, she asked. Like we were acquaintances. Like we hadn't shared a bed for 4 years. Fine, I said. Busy. You. Really good, actually, she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Brightness. Not the manufactured kind she used in professional situations. Something that sounded almost genuine. I've been thinking a lot, she continued, about what I want, about the kind of life I actually want. That's good, I said. I feel like for a long time I followed a path that made sense on paper. Good relationship, moving toward marriage, shared goals, shared property. It all looked right. It looked right because it was right, I said mildly. Was it though? I think so, I said. I think we both chose it deliberately. I think you chose it deliberately, she said, and it wasn't cruel, just observational. I think I let myself get swept up in how certain you were. I thought about that. Vivian, I was certain because I loved you and wanted to build something with you. That's not sweeping someone up. That's called having a relationship. She was quiet. I know, she said finally. I know that. I'm just trying to understand my own part in it. Take all the time you need, I said. And this time, when I said it, I had already made a decision. The decision wasn't angry. It wasn't revenge. It was just the next logical move on the board. Clifton and I had been talking regularly. I'd also consulted a financial advisor I trusted, a precise, no-nonsense woman named Petra, who had helped me structure my portfolio over the past several years. The analysis was clear. The condo was sitting in a market window that wouldn't last forever. The area had peaked in buyer interest, inventory was low, and a sale now would extract maximum value. Holding it indefinitely while my relationship status was undefined meant accepting risk on multiple fronts, financial, legal, and emotional. I decided to sell. I brought it to Vivian directly. I think we should sell the condo, I told her on the phone. Silence. What? The market is at a strong point. We'll each walk away with a significant amount. It doesn't make sense to hold it while things are undefined. You want to sell our home? It was an investment property we lived in together, I said carefully. It was our home, she said, and now there was an edge to her voice. Vivian, you asked for a pause on our engagement. I asked to reevaluate, not to liquidate everything we built. You asked to reevaluate compatibility, I said. I'm reevaluating asset strategy. That's not the same thing. No, I agreed. It's not. She pushed back harder than I expected. She said I was being cold. She said I was punishing her. She said she needed more time before we made any big decisions. I listened to all of it. Then I said, very quietly, Vivian, I've been waiting for 4 weeks to understand where I stand in my own life. 4 weeks isn't very long, she said. In a defined relationship, no, I agreed. But in a pause that has no timeline and no conditions? 4 weeks is actually quite a long time to have your financial future sitting in neutral. So this is about money. It's about clarity, I said. And right now I don't have any. Then ask for clarity from me directly. Okay, I said. Are we still engaged? Pause. I don't know yet. Are you planning to come home? Pause. I don't know yet. Do you have any idea how long this pause will last? Longer pause. No. Then I have my answer, I said. And the answer is that I need to act in my own best interests because right now there's nobody acting in them for me. She signed the listing agreement 2 weeks later. She wasn't happy about it, but she was rational enough to understand that refusing would create a legal standoff that would damage both of us. The condo sold in 11 days. 11 days. The market was exactly as strong as I'd predicted. We each walked away with a number that was, objectively, a very good outcome for both parties. The split was clean. Clifton oversaw it. Everything was documented. I moved into a rental temporarily, a 2-bedroom apartment in a building I'd actually toured for investment purposes years ago and always liked. It was efficient, well-maintained, and completely mine. No shared deed. No shared liability. No undefined ownership. Around this time, I also restructured several other things. The joint savings account was dissolved by mutual agreement. Her half was transferred to her account. My half went into a holding entity I'd set up years ago but hadn't fully utilized. A simple LLC that held my personal real estate investments with a clean separation between business and personal assets. Petra helped me rebalance my investment portfolio. She'd been gently suggesting for years that I was slightly overexposed to certain positions that made more sense for a married couple than for a single individual operating independently. We addressed that. We restructured my insurance coverage. We updated my beneficiary designations. We reviewed and revised my operating agreements for the 2 commercial properties I held in partnership with other investors, adding clearer language around personal liability and equity distribution. None of this was dramatic. It was just basic, responsible, adult housekeeping. The kind of thing you should do every few years anyway. But doing it all at once had a clarifying effect. I emerged from the process feeling, for the first time in months, completely solid. Like I had stood on uncertain ground for so long that I had forgotten what certain ground felt like. And now I remembered. In month 3 of the pause, I got a message from a mutual friend. His name was Derek, and he and I had known each other through the commercial real estate world for about 5 years. He was one of those people who exists in every social group as a kind of unofficial relay station for information. Not a gossip, just someone who knows everyone and doesn't always think carefully before sharing what he knows. The message said, "Hey man, saw Vivian out last night with a group. Looked like she was having fun. Just wanted to check in and make sure you're good." I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and went back to the lease analysis I was working on. 3 hours later, I picked the phone up and replied, "All good. Appreciate you checking in." I didn't ask any follow-up questions. I didn't need to. What Derek was telling me, wrapped in the careful language of checking in, was that Vivian was living her life. Actively. Publicly. And she wasn't doing it quietly. That information didn't devastate me. It confirmed something I had already understood on that night in the restaurant when I noticed she had rehearsed her lines. She had been ready to leave. She just hadn't been ready to say so cleanly. The pause was her version of a graceful exit that kept her options open, kept me available if the grass turned out not to be greener. And I had the profound, quiet satisfaction of knowing I had not been available. Vivian and I didn't speak much in months 3 and 4. The occasional message. Logistics about the remaining shared items, books, kitchen appliances, a small piece of furniture we'd bought together on a trip that neither of us particularly needed, but both of us felt some vague attachment to. We handled all of it with a kind of professional courtesy that would have looked strange to anyone who knew how close we'd once been. She picked up her things while I was at work. She left the key on the counter. She sent a text afterward that said, "I think I got everything. Let me know if you find anything that's mine." I replied, "Will do." That was, for almost 2 months, our last real exchange. During those months, I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I dated. Nothing serious. Nothing that was trying to be serious. Just dinner, conversation, the experience of sitting across from someone new and being fully present without the weight of a shared future pressing on every exchange. It was surprisingly easy. I had forgotten that I was, by most objective measures, a reasonably appealing person to have dinner with. I was financially stable, professionally grounded, calm in a way that people tend to find either very reassuring or very boring. And I had learned to be genuinely interested in people without needing anything from them. One woman I went out with a few times, a landscape architect named Celeste, told me on our 3rd dinner that I seemed like someone who had recently been through something difficult and come out the other side without bitterness. "Is that a compliment?" I asked. "It's a rare thing," she said. We didn't turn into anything serious. She was in a transitional period of her own and wasn't looking for weight. Neither was I. But the dinners were good. The conversation was real. And I remembered, slowly, that I was a person who existed outside of the shape that Vivian and I had built together. Around month 5, I closed on the office complex acquisition I'd been working on. The deal had taken 9 months from initial interest to close. It was the largest single transaction I'd managed independently. The tenant restructuring plan I designed was aggressive but viable, and 2 of the 3 anchor tenants I'd been negotiating with had signed letters of intent before the ink was dry on the purchase agreement. I was standing in the empty lobby of the building on the day we closed, just standing there in the quiet, and I felt something that I can only describe as complete. Not happy exactly, not even particularly proud, just complete. Like a version of myself that had been partly theoretical for years had finally become fully actual. I thought about Vivian briefly in that moment, not with longing, not with bitterness, just with a kind of neutral acknowledgement. She had been part of the story that led here, but she was not part of this moment, and the moment was entirely whole without her. The call came on a Thursday evening in month 7. I was at my desk, reviewing documents for a smaller acquisition I was considering. Her name on my phone screen was a mild surprise, not a shock. I had wondered, occasionally, when this call would come. "Hey," she said when I answered. "Hey, is this a weird time?" "It's fine," I said. "What's up?" A pause. The irony of her pausing after everything the word pause had cost us was not lost on me. "I just wanted to talk," she said. "It's been a while." 7 months, I said. "Yeah," she said softly. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said. "You?" And here there was something different in the silence. A texture to it. Like she was choosing her next words more carefully than the casual opening suggested. "I'm okay," she said finally. "Not good. Not great. Okay. How's the coast?" I asked, because the last I'd heard, she was still staying near Brooke. "I came back a few weeks ago actually," she said. "Oh, I'm staying in an apartment for now. Temporary situation." I processed that. Temporary situation. Things with Brooke didn't work out as a long-term arrangement? I asked, keeping my voice completely neutral. "It was always going to be temporary," she said quickly. "Of course." Silence. "I actually wanted to talk to you about something," she said. "Okay. I've been thinking a lot about where things stand between us." "That's interesting timing," I said. "Why?" "Well," I said, "you asked for a pause to reevaluate long-term compatibility. And now you're calling from a temporary apartment situation after 7 months. So the timing is interesting." Silence. "That's a little unfair," she said. "Is it?" "I'm not calling because of logistics," she said. "What are you calling because of?" And now her voice shifted. It became the voice I had known for 4 years. Softer, more careful. The voice she used when she wanted me to lower my defenses. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "About us. About what we had. About whether I made a mistake." I let that sit in the air. "I think I needed to go through this to understand something," she continued. "To understand what?" I asked. "That what we had was real," she said, "and that I took it for granted." "Vivian," I said, "let me ask you something directly." "Okay," she said. "While you were reevaluating, were you in any kind of relationship with someone else?" A very long pause. "That's complicated," she said. "That's a yes," I said. "It wasn't serious," she said quickly. "It was someone I knew from years ago who reached out, and I got caught up in the excitement of something new. But it wasn't serious, and it's over now." I nodded to myself, not in surprise, in confirmation. "So you went on a pause," I said slowly, "to reevaluate our compatibility. You found someone new. That didn't work out. You came back to the city. You're in a temporary apartment. And now you're calling me." Silence. "When you say it like that, it sounds bad," she said. "Vivian," I said, "how would you like me to say it?" She pushed back. She said I was reducing a complex emotional journey to a cynical timeline. She said she had genuinely grown during this time. She said she understood things about herself now that she hadn't understood before. She said the situation with the other person had shown her, ultimately, that what she and I had built was rare and real and worth fighting for. I listened to all of it. And then I said, "I believe that you believe all of that. But I've spent the last 7 months making decisions too," I said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not in the same position I was in when you asked for the pause." "What position are you in?" "A better one," I said simply. Silence. "Better how?" "Clearer," I said. "About what?" "About what I want. About what I'm building. About the kind of partnership I'm willing to enter and the terms under which I'm willing to enter it." She was quiet for a moment. "You're saying you've moved on." "I'm saying I've moved forward," I said. "There's a difference." "Are you seeing someone?" she asked, and there was a tightness in her voice that I recognized. "Not seriously," I said. "Not seriously meaning?" "Meaning I'm not in a relationship with anyone right now," I said. "But I've also not been waiting for you." "I didn't ask you to wait." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." She called again 2 days later. This time the conversation was more direct. She wanted to know if there was a path back. I told her honestly that I wasn't sure. She said she was willing to do the work. She mentioned therapy, couples counseling, all the things she had dismissed 18 months ago. I told her I appreciated that. I also told her that the landscape had changed. What landscape? She asked. The property is sold, I said. Obviously. The joint accounts are dissolved. I know. My financial structure has been rebuilt around a single-person operation, I said. That sounds very clinical, she said. It's accurate, I said. So what are you saying? That you'd make me sign a prenup if we got back together? I think, I said carefully, that any future partnership would need clearly defined terms. Partnership, she repeated. Like a business arrangement. Like an honest agreement, I said. Between two people who understand exactly what they're each bringing to the table and what they're each protecting. I don't want a contract, she said. I want you. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, I said. But you're making this sound so cold. Vivian, I said. You called me from a temporary apartment after a 7-month pause that included a relationship with someone else. I'm not trying to be cruel when I say this. But cold is a choice I've made deliberately. Because warm didn't protect me. There were 3 more calls over the following 2 weeks. Each one went a little deeper. She told me more about what had happened on the coast. The other man had been an old flame, someone she'd known in her early 20s, before me. When she'd reached out to Brooke in what she described as a moment of crisis, this person had also been part of that world, and the proximity had turned into something. I convinced myself it was about rediscovering who I was before us, she said. And then I discovered that who I was before us wasn't someone I actually wanted to be. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said, that the person I am with you is better than the person I am without you. I was quiet for a long moment. Vivian, that's one of the things you need to be careful about, I said. What? Building an identity that depends on another person to function well. That's what I was trying to fix, she said. I know, I said. And I'm telling you that the conclusion you've reached is the same structural problem wearing a different outfit. She was silent. Before, you were worried you'd lost yourself in our relationship, I said. Now you're saying the relationship is what makes you your best self. Both of those positions make you a variable, I said. And I can't build something stable with a variable. In the 4th conversation, she asked about the condo. Not the money. The space itself. Do you ever think about it? She asked. About what specifically? The living room, she said. The way the morning light came through those east windows. I did think about it sometimes. Not with nostalgia, exactly. More like you think about a place you visited that was beautiful, but that you know you're not going back to. Sometimes, I said. I miss it, she said. I miss having something that felt permanent. Vivian, I said. Where are you living right now? A pause. Still in the temporary apartment. How temporary? Month to month, she said. I processed that. Month to month rental. 7 months after the pause. The coastal experiment hadn't worked out. The other man hadn't worked out. The apartment was temporary. And she was calling me. How's work? I asked. A slightly different pause. It's been a little slow, she said. I took some time off when I was away, and I'm still rebuilding my client base. I see. I didn't say anything else about it. But I cataloged it. The picture was assembling itself with a clarity I found both sad and unsurprising. The 5th conversation was the one where everything became explicit. She had been building toward it for weeks. She asked if we could meet in person. I agreed. We met at a cafe that was neutral territory, a place neither of us had particular associations with. She looked good. She looked like someone who had been through something and processed it thoughtfully. But she also looked tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. She had ordered coffee by the time I arrived. She stood when she saw me. We did an awkward, almost hug that became a brief, definite hug. We sat down. You look well, she said. Thank you. So do you. She looked at her cup. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks. Just say it, I said. She looked up at me. I want to come back, she said. I want us to try again. I held her gaze. Tell me about the apartment, I said. She blinked. What? You said it's month to month. How long have you been there? About 6 weeks. And before that, with Brooke. Yes. So you've been transient for 7 months. She set her cup down. Is that a problem? It's a data point, I said. I'm not trying to be unkind, I said. But I want to be honest with you about what I see. What do you see? She asked, and there was a wariness in her voice now. I see someone who had stability, I said, who chose to step back from it to explore something else, who explored it, found it unsatisfying, and is now looking to re-enter the stable situation. She was very still. You make it sound calculated, she said. I'm not saying it's calculated, I said. I'm saying it's a pattern. And I need you to understand that the stable situation has changed. How? Structurally, I said. The property is gone. The joint accounts are gone. My financial structure is different. My plans for the next 2 to 3 years are different. The version of us you're trying to come back to doesn't exist anymore in the same form. So what form does it exist in? She asked. That's what would need to be defined, I said. If we were to try again, it would need to be on terms that were explicitly agreed upon. Terms, she said. You keep using that word. Because I mean it, I said simply. She got frustrated. Not angry. Frustrated. The way people get when they realize the conversation they prepared for isn't the conversation they're having. I came here to talk about us, she said. About feelings. About whether we still have something real. And you're talking about terms and structure and strategy. Vivian, I said. You asked for a pause to reevaluate long-term compatibility. I gave you that pause without argument. I respected your need for space. I didn't call. I didn't push. I didn't beg. I gave you every inch of room you asked for. And while you had that room, I used the time I had. I restructured. I protected myself. I grew. Not to punish you, but because no one else was going to do it for me. She was quiet. I understand that, she said finally. I do. I know I left you in an impossible position. You didn't leave me in an impossible position, I said. You left me in an uncertain one. The impossible thing would have been staying in that uncertainty indefinitely. She looked at the table. So, is there anything left? She asked quietly. And I thought about that. Really thought about it. There might be, I said. But it would have to start from where we actually are now. Not from where we were. Not from the life we had built. That version of our life was built on an assumption that both parties were committed to it. And that assumption turned out to be incorrect. A new version would need to be built on something more solid. She looked at me for a long moment. You've changed, she said. Not unkindly. Just observationally. Yes, I said. Is that bad? She asked. That depends entirely on what you were hoping to come back to. We had coffee for almost 2 hours. She was honest, more honest than she'd been in the phone calls. She told me that the other man had ended things, not the other way around. She told me that Brooke, despite being a good friend, couldn't be a permanent solution. She told me that her client base had shrunk because she'd been inconsistent for several months and that she was rebuilding from a lower position than she'd expected. She told me that she'd realized, somewhere around month 4, that the freedom she'd been chasing wasn't actually about freedom. It was about avoiding commitment. And that the irony was that avoiding commitment had not made her feel free. It had made her feel adrift. I listened to all of it. And I respected that she was saying it clearly. I appreciate your honesty, I said. That means something. But appreciation and a relationship are two different things, I said. And I think you need to be in a stable position on your own before we have a real conversation about what a relationship between us would look like. Why? Because right now you're in a transitional moment. Temporary apartment, rebuilding client base, coming off a situation that didn't work out. And I'd never know, if we got back together now, whether you came back for me or for the stability. She opened her mouth, then closed it, because she knew I was right. We didn't end the coffee badly. We ended it honestly. She said she understood. She said she needed to think. I said that was fine. I said that if she wanted to have a different conversation in 6 months, when her situation was more settled, I was open to it. 6 months, she said. That's a long time. 7 months ago you asked me to wait indefinitely, I said. I'm offering you a specific timeline. She almost smiled at that. That's very you, she said. Yeah, I said. It is. I want to be clear about something, because I've told pieces of this story to a few people and the reaction tends to split down a specific line. Some people hear the part about selling the property and restructuring the finances and think, cold. They think, calculated. They think, he punished her. I understand why it looks that way. But here's what those people are missing. When Vivian asked for a pause, she was making a unilateral decision about a bilateral structure. She was, without consultation, withdrawing from an agreement that both of us had built and both of us depended on. And she was doing it with no timeline, no conditions, no plan. She was essentially saying, I need to figure out if I want this, while leaving everything we'd built together sitting in an undefined state, exposed to whatever decisions she eventually made. The things I did, the sale, the restructuring, the financial separation, were not punishment. They were the natural, logical response to a change in conditions. If a business partner tells you they're not sure if they want to continue the partnership, you don't leave the shared accounts open and the shared assets unprotected while you wait for them to decide. You protect your position. You clarify your exposure. You make sure that whatever decision gets made, you're standing on solid ground when it lands. That's not cold. That's what taking care of yourself looks like. In the months after the coffee meeting, I thought about her occasionally. Not constantly. Not with longing. More with a kind of clear-eyed awareness that she represented a specific thing I'd needed to learn. I'd spent years loving her in a way that was consistent and certain and fully committed. And the thing I had learned, not from bitterness but from the simple fact of what happened, was that consistency and certainty in a relationship only work if both people are operating at the same frequency. You can be the most dependable, most patient, most grounded person in the room. And if the other person is still deciding whether they want to be in the room, all of your groundedness does is give them something to stand on while they make up their mind. I didn't want to be somebody's ground. I wanted to be somebody's choice. And the difference between those two things is everything. About 8 months after the coffee meeting, I got a message from her. It wasn't the emotional message I might have expected. It was short, professional almost. She said she'd been doing well. She said she had stabilized her client base and had moved into a proper 1-year lease. She said she'd been in therapy and had found it useful. She said she didn't know if the door was still open, but she wanted to know if I'd be willing to have a conversation. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. I said I was glad to hear she was in a better place. I said the door wasn't closed. I said I was currently in a position where I was focused on my work and not actively looking to rebuild what we'd had. But I said that if she wanted to have a conversation, I was open to it. Not as a step back toward what we were, as a beginning of something different. She replied with a single line. That might be enough to start with. I don't know where it goes from here. I want to be honest about that. I don't know if what Vivian and I have is a story that's resuming or a story that's finished. I know that I'm not the same person who sat in that restaurant and went quiet when she dropped the word pause on our anniversary dinner. I know that the version of me that waited, that held everything open and undefined while she figured herself out, that version doesn't exist anymore. I know that anything I build from here, with her or with someone else, will be built on terms that are clear from the beginning. Not because I've become someone who treats relationships like contracts, but because I've become someone who understands that clarity is a form of respect, that knowing what you want and saying so is not coldness. It's the opposite of coldness. It's the most honest, caring thing you can do for another person. You tell them exactly who you are and what you need, and then you let them decide. The last thing I'll say is this. There was a moment, maybe a month after the coffee meeting, when I was driving home late from the office and I passed the street where our condo had been. I didn't slow down. I didn't turn in. I just noticed the street sign as I went by, and I thought, that building is still there. But the life we had inside it is a different version of this city now. Somebody else's morning light through those east windows. Somebody else's life in that space. Not better or worse than what we'd had. Just different. Just after. And I kept driving. The road ahead was clear. The night was quiet. And I was, for the first time in a long time, exactly where I was supposed to be. Going forward. Without looking back. Not because looking back hurts, but because forward is where everything worth building actually lives.